Okay, so today we're diving into what sources are describing as a really significant, maybe even unprecedented diplomatic development in the Middle East, an apparent breakthrough framework. And our mission here is simple: get past the headlines. This deep dive is looking purely at the source material detailing this complex, high-stakes 20-point peace plan proposed by former President Trump. We want to really understand the specific details, the conditions, and crucially, the unresolved issues.
Right. And if you look closely at the sources, they really paint a picture of a potential inflection point, a moment where, major players, Israel, Hamas, regional allies, have signaled they're ready for some kind of movement. But as you said, critical differences are still there,
Yeah.
big ones, and especially around the long-term goals, security, who governs Gaza, that sort of thing.
Okay, let's unpack this then, starting with the plan itself. The headlines were dramatic, sure, but the substance is what matters. The sources all center on this unified 20-point framework. It was unveiled publicly by President Trump, standing alongside Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. What was actually in it?
Well, it seems the plan was structured quite deliberately as a phased approach, sort of designed to build trust, address the immediate humanitarian crisis, but also tackle the long-term security stuff. It kind of breaks down into three broad stages. The first one, the most immediate, was all about hostage release and humanitarian aid. This had a very specific formula for swapping Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners, and at the same time, really ramping up aid getting into Gaza.
Right, the immediate crisis. But what about the longer game? That's always the trickier part, needing bigger political concessions.
Exactly. So phase two, according to the sources, focused on Israeli withdrawal and regional normalization. This talked about a timeline, though maybe not fully defined yet, for IDF withdrawal from parts of Gaza. And that was tied to pushing for broader normalization deals between Israel and other Arab states, something we know has been a major U.S. diplomatic goal for a while. And then finally, phase three dealt with reconstruction and governance. This is the really tough part. The post-conflict reality. Huge international rebuilding efforts. And the key point, setting up a new governing structure for Gaza, one that's independent of Hamas's current political and military control.
Okay, so that's the framework. That structure is important for understanding what happened next. But the sources suggest this wasn't just, politely tabled. There was intense pressure involved.
Yeah, this breakthrough apparently followed a very explicit ultimatum from Trump earlier that week. The sources detail him warning Hamas, basically giving them until Sunday evening to accept the deal, or else face consequences he described quite starkly as all hell like no one has ever seen before.
Yeah.
That kind of public, time-bound threat, it really shifted the whole dynamic, didn't it?
It absolutely did. And interestingly, once Hamas gave some initial signals they were considering it, Trump immediately pivoted his public stance. On Friday, using Truth Social, he issued a very clear call to Israel.
What was that call?
He called on Israel to immediately stop the bombing of Gaza. Okay, and his reasoning for that.
Well, the rationale he gave, publicly at least, wasn't about long-term peace at that moment. It was tactical. He argued that the bombing, as it was happening then, made it far too dangerous to carry out the complex Phase 1 hostage release safely and quickly. So he framed the ceasefire as a necessary step, almost a prerequisite, just to make that first humanitarian exchange possible.
Got it. So you have this high-pressure setup, this ultimatum, and then this tactical call for a halt to bombing focused on the hostages. Given all that, the sources say Hamas did respond. They announced they agreed in principle, but only to portions of the plan. They used the phrase, ready for a lasting peace. So looking at the source material again, what exactly did they agree to? What specific parts?
Well, their conditional acceptance seemed to focus on two main areas, both related to Gaza's future non-military aspects, really. First, the hostage release. They agreed to it, using the specific formula laid out in the plan. They committed to releasing all Israeli hostages, living and deceased, but with a key condition, provided the necessary field conditions for the exchange are met.
And that formula itself is probably quite complex, right?
Now, extremely sensitive. Sources suggest it's not just a ratio of prisoners per hostage, but potentially involves specific names, categories of prisoners. The logistical details are immense, but they agreed in principle to that part.
Okay, hostages first. What was the second area they agreed on? You mentioned it related to governance.
Exactly. The second big piece was Gaza governance. They signaled they were ready to transfer the day-to-day civilian administration of Gaza, hand it over to an interim Palestinian body.
An interim body, made up of whom?
Technocrats. That's the key term used in the sources. A body of technocrats, backed financially and politically by key Arab and Islamic states.
Right, technocrats. Let's just quickly clarify that for everyone listening, because it's a really significant word in this context.
Sure. A technocrat is essentially an expert, someone skilled in a specific field, like finance, public health, engineering, whatever, appointed for their skills, not their political ties or ideology. So by agreeing to hand civilian governance to technocrats, Hamas is basically signaling, okay, we're willing to step back from running the day-to-day non-military affairs of Gaza, handing that over to a non-political administrative body. It's a potential major shift away from their direct rule.
That sounds like a huge concession on paper, potentially paving the way for stability. But, and this is a massive but, the source material points out one critical area Hamas completely avoided addressing.
The elephant in the room.
Exactly. They didn't touch on one of Trump's core conditions,
Oh.
the permanent disarmament of their military wing.
And that's the absolute sticking point, isn't it? A senior Hamas official, Musa Abu Marzouk, basically laid out their counterposition to Al Jazeera. He said quite clearly the group won't hand over weapons until Israel ends its occupation of Gaza. It frames that fundamental security clash. Whose security comes first? Does Hamas keep its arms, or does Israel get the guarantees at once? They're diametrically opposed on that sequencing.
But didn't the official add a little nuance, something about the future of those weapons?
Yeah, it did, yes. A slight nuance. He reportedly suggested that arms could eventually be transferred to a future Palestinian governing authority.
Ugh.
But that word, eventually, it raises a huge question.
Is eventually good enough?
Precisely. Is that a genuine signal towards disarmament down the line, or is it perhaps a tactic to keep the military wing intact while exploring this technocratic governance option? For Israel, for the U.S., for the regional brokers, eventually is almost certainly not going to cut it when it comes to long-term security guarantees.
Right. So we have this mixed bag. Conditional yes on hostages and civilian governance, but a hard no, for now at least, on disarmament. How did the other key players react? Israel, the mediators.
Israel's official response coming from Netanyahu's office was cautious but positive on the first step. They stated Israel was ready for the immediate implementation of the first stage, focusing very specifically on the hostage release. That was their priority.
Yay, ready for phase one.
But, and this is important, they attached a major caveat. While saying the principles were aligned with President Trump's vision, they also made a point of reiterating Israel's broader war aims.
Hold on. If the framework is meant to de-escalate towards some kind of stable solution, but Israel is still publicly stating these broader war aims that presumably go beyond just getting hostages back, doesn't that clash with the whole spirit of the deal? Doesn't it risk undermining the mediators?
That's exactly the tension the source material points to. It's a strategic risk, absolutely. Israel seems to be signaling two things at once. Yes, let's do the humanitarian swap now, but also we haven't given up on our ultimate security goals, which, for them, includes dealing with Hamas's military capacity. For mediators like Qatar or Turkey, hearing Israel insist on those broader aims, even while agreeing to phase one, must raise serious flags about whether this process can actually survive beyond the initial hostage exchange.
Still, we have to acknowledge the diplomatic effort that got things even this far. Trump made sure to thank the regional partners publicly. Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan were named. Their role in brokering this, getting Hamas to the table with even conditional agreement, seems to have been crucial.
No doubt. Their behind-the-scenes work was likely essential.
And we saw immediate public backing from Qatar, didn't we? Their foreign ministry spokesperson, Majed Ansari, welcomed Hamas's statement. And significantly, he also endorsed Trump's call for that immediate ceasefire. That suggests the regional players saw the pause in fighting not just as part of Trump's plan, but as genuinely necessary to actually do the hostage release and get that vital humanitarian aid flowing.
Mm-hmm. It shows a kind of alignment on the immediate priorities, at least.
Yeah.
So if we pull all these threads together, connected to the bigger picture, you can see why Trump might hail this as a breakthrough, talking about long-sought peace. But the source material itself is quite sober, quite realistic. It clearly identifies two massive unresolved issues that could still derail everything, perhaps even stopping it from moving past stage one.
Okay, let's just hammer those home one last time. These are the potential deal breakers we need to watch in the coming days. First, Hamas's refusal, right now, on permanent disarmament, the whole question of military power.
Right. That's gap number one. And gap number two is the longer-term governance of Gaza. Okay, Hamas might concede civilian administration to technocrats. But who holds ultimate authority? Security authority, political authority. A technocratic body can't really function effectively if there's a separate, heavily armed military faction operating independently alongside it. That structure just isn't stable long-term.
So the stakes, for you listening and for the entire region, are incredibly high right now. The next few days, maybe weeks, will really show whether this framework, born from an ultimatum built on conditional acceptance, leads to real de-escalation.
Or whether it just collapses under the weight of these fundamental disagreements about security and power.
Hmm.
The core tension, it seems, is stuck between the immediate humanitarian need getting hostages out, aid in which seems possible now, and the long-term non-negotiable security demands of both sides, which seem as far apart as ever.
So wrapping this up, what have we seen? We've analyzed the specifics of a really high-stakes negotiation involving multiple parties, triggered by a public ultimatum. We saw a rapid but very conditional acceptance focused mainly on the humanitarian side and civilian governance, while completely sidestepping, for now, the crucial military question.
Yeah, it really means that while a path for humanitarian relief might have opened up, that road to any kind of lasting peace, it seems to run straight through the unresolved question. Who ultimately controls security on the ground in Gaza when the fighting stops? Until that issue, the weapons, the independent military wing is tackled head-on. Any agreement, even one with regional backing, looks fundamentally fragile.
Which leaves us, and you, with a final thought to consider, based directly on what the sources suggest. Hamas seems willing to discuss handing over day-to-day governance to technocrats, effectively ceding civilian political control. But they refuse, point blank for now, on disarmament. So does this signal some kind of calculated strategic pivot, a move towards becoming more like a political entity with a separate armed reserve? Or is the military wing's refusal to disarm simply the ultimate non-starter, the thing that guarantees any lasting deal is impossible? That's the core tension to watch.